Welcome everyone to another episode of Get Tech Smart, and I am your host, Flo Nicholas, and as usual, we're gonna dig deep into all the exciting things that are happening in technology. And for this show, I am super excited. I mean, okay, I know I say that all the time, but it's just like there's so much going on in tech, and when I find a guest who's in the niche that I wanna teach you more about, it is so exciting for me. Blockchain technology, Web3, cryptocurrency, digital wallet, holy moly, mind-blowing. But I'm gonna help you learn about all these technologies that are happening right now today on this show, straight from UNH, which I feel like I have UNH here a lot, which is not a problem.
That's a good thing.
That's a good thing. Joshua Serra, and you are the Interim Director at the Entrepreneurship ECenter.
That's right.
So, all right, first of all, we gotta know about you. Before we dig deep, we gotta know why you are the nerd of all of these various emerging technologies that are going on.
Sure. Well, thanks for having me. First of all, I'm a big fan. And yeah, I'm a super geek. That's okay. I own that. I like tech generally, but I also really like following emergent tech. And so I got into crypto, specifically Bitcoin, many years ago. And that back when you could still mine it on a regular computer and all those sort of fun things. And so I'd say about a decade ago, I had left a software development job that I had and had opened a co-working space back when co-working was a new concept here in New Hampshire. And I was trying to foster a community in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, just to hang out and talk about cool things, right? Not unlike this show. And so I really liked to dig into various different topics to host conversations. And I did partnerships with the Music Hall for that and their digital series. We had lots of meetups in our co-working space, and I'm just a big fan of building community, and specifically then in the Seacoast area. So I stumbled upon cryptocurrency, blockchain, all those sort of things back then, and I've just been following since.
Yeah, and for some people who are listening, they're like, mining on a computer, what's going on here? So we're gonna take it a little bit slow.
Sure.
And we're gonna break things down a little bit. So I'm gonna start with blockchain technology, right? Where that's a term that we keep hearing. Mm-hmm. And we keep hearing about companies using blockchain technology like Walmart, for example, mm-hmm. for their supply chain, mm-hmm. and just kind of monitoring orders. So what in the world does that even mean? Let's start with a basic and simple definition.
Well, luckily we have a 2-hour program just to talk about blockchain and the supply chain, right? So supply chain is actually a really good example of that because it kind of gets away from the financial incentives of like I'm making a bunch of money on Bitcoin, which is a lot of people kind of hear about. Think of blockchain as simply as a database, and it's a special kind of database, obviously. But what makes it really important and different from what we've had before for all the different kinds of databases and technologies that we have is this is a database that is globally accessible to every person with an internet connection on the planet. And it is so without permission. And it's something that everybody can trust. And so any one of those things is actually pretty unique and very special. But when you add in components to a digital identity or wallet, and having that public database that everybody can verify and trust, then you open up opportunities that we once assumed simply couldn't be done. And an example of that would be for supply chain. We've all seen outbreaks of, like, what is it called, listeria, right? The horrible outbreaks in our lettuce, right? And we have these recalls. And it's really hard to track. Where did this lettuce come from? Yeah. Right? And when did it come on that train? What shipment was bad? What was contaminated and when? And so because there's multiple different persons or entities of some kind that are touching and interacting with that shipment by the time it gets to the store and then it gets to us. And so that means there's probably a lot of different spreadsheets hidden in whatever crappy old computer that isn't backed up, and databases that Walmart has, right, and they require their suppliers to use, and all kinds of other pieces and components that are very brittle and not sharing data. And if they do share that data, it's not accessible to us, right? We don't have any insight into any of that. And in fact, only probably the biggest players can kind of force that to happen. And so if you think of most retailers, if you think of the federal government trying to keep track of any number of things that they care about, there's no transparency. And so having a global shared database where we can store information and then actually through the blockchain, which is essentially a ledger, mark a record that says that this thing went from this entity, this wallet address in this case, to this entity at exactly this date and time, right? And then it went from this entity to this one, and then from this one to this one. And then it split in half, and then it went to these two. And we can trace every single transaction that's ever happened. Let's say, we'll give it the Bitcoin blockchain. That wouldn't be what they would use for the supply chain, but it's what everybody hears about. We can trace every single transaction that's ever occurred throughout the history of Bitcoin just by doing that, reading backwards in time on this ledger. And essentially what makes the database kind of special specifically for Bitcoin is it's not unlike a ledger we would have for accounting, that we're moving money from this to this, right? And so, but it's not a database where we edit records or remove records like we might see in a normal database that we're used to. Right. It's just adding a record after record. And so we know by going backwards, okay, that wallet address had sent this, so I'm going to go backwards to that one. I'm going to go backwards to that one, and I can find that chain over time. Really powerful stuff for a supply chain, right? You incorporate that with some other modern technology, RFIDs or tracking tags or anything like that, and you'll use scanner codes or whatever, and you can start scanning individual lots or boxes and keeping track of things that we never would have considered possible just a decade previous.
Yeah, and for supply chain, this is huge, right? Because of, we have theft, we have items that go missing. If a customer says, hey, I never got that, 80-inch TV, but the 80-inch TV is sitting in the customer's house, it's that availability to be able to really track where their deliveries are going, whether, they reached where they needed to be. So it's just this new, like you said, database of transparency, which is global. However, because it's global and it's easily accessible, right? I think for some people, they get concerned in terms of identity theft and any other cybersecurity issues. Can we talk a little bit about that? How much safer is blockchain technology than, your typical other delivery tracking system?
So, well, I would say that probably we wouldn't have a lot of insight individually to that tracking system because those corporations are probably using some semi-private thing, but theoretically it's on this blockchain that's shared, right? As opposed to other much more public blockchain information that we might share. For example, me paying my brother back for a beer last night and sending him a little bit of money. I could do that on a Venmo, which, by the way, is super public.
Right.
Right. There's already a lot of public information, but I could also do that over the blockchain, right? And so in that particular case, our privacy is about as protected as we're able to make it, right? Or we care about it. And unfortunately, the general public just doesn't care. We say we care, we think we care, but we give all that information away constantly. And and everybody's gonna say, I don't do that, but I guarantee everybody is watching the show had the website pop up and say something about cookies and you didn't even bother reading, you just clicked on OK.
Accept.
Right? I did an experiment to see what happens if you say no every time for a whole day. It turns out mostly everything works just as well. But we all just accept. We don't care. We don't read the 48 pages of terms and conditions that are required in order to use the new Twitter killer threads, right?
Yeah.
Or any of those other privacy invasive applications out there. So when it comes to cryptocurrency or blockchain or anything else, every bit of data we put out there is going to be accessible to everybody else. What might be separate and might be different is we don't have to associate our personal identity and our information with whatever record we have on the blockchain. In other words, the wallet, the thing that's controlling that transaction, is a long string of numbers and letters, right? That's that wallet address, that's a unique address. That's associated with us only if we make that association available, right? And so that doesn't necessarily need to be something that we're disclosing. And in fact, we can control a bit more of our identity that way in certain aspects. As an example, once I have let's say an Ethereum. Ethereum is another incredibly popular platform for crypto, and is where a lot of the smart contracts and NFTs and Web3 and things we'll talk about in the future, that's where a lot of that activity is going on. And so if I own about a few NFTs and I want to trade or transact, I don't have to create all these different accounts and all these different platforms. My account is simply my wallet address, my login from my wallet address, and my private key and authorization of that. And I can log into any one of them, and they instantly have access that I give them specifically to do things with whatever's in my wallet. And so I'm controlling that identity in a much more strict, potentially strict and granular way than generally you are when you're using your email address and you're probably the same password you use for everything else.
Yeah.
And all the different other platforms that we use.
Yeah.
Right.
And what I've seen also, and I'm just trying to transition now into talking about Web3, is that there's kind of, I guess people interchange Web3 and blockchain together. Is it the same platform? If not, how are they different?
Right. Well, Web3, I think, is sort of a category of thinking about, I'd say, a subset of what can happen on the blockchain. So blockchain it's just a platform, right, for this special kind of database. And there's different kinds of blockchains, and some have features and benefits that are more interesting for various tasks. But Web3 was really tying into more of the digital, well, right now, primarily, more in the digital collectibles area, right? So NFTs, a lot of people, when they think of NFT, they think of some graphic that some stupid person is paying $1 million for, right?
Right. And let's break down what the acronym stands for.
So
the NFT.
Sure, NFT would mean non-fungible token, and what that really means is it's a way to identify that this is a unique thing. And so in a digital collectible world, as an example, my kid plays Pokemon, right? They have tons of Pokemon cards. A lot of us parents, right, are dealing with a lot of Pokemon. And the uber rare whatever thing that my kid pulled the other day. So if I go and make my own Pokemon card, I can design it, I can Photoshop it, I can print it out. It's not the same thing, right? That card is unique and special. They know it's a one of X and all these sort of attributes about that. So on the blockchain, anybody can produce all kinds of stuff and put it out there.
Right.
But there's certain standards that have been created to be able to recognize uniqueness. Think of it as just like a primary key for those of us that are in the computer world. Having the ability to create a primary key in a public global database that everybody can then build off of is pretty powerful. We can all point to that and say, that's that primary key, that's the unique collection. I know that these are the set of cards that belong in that collection. I know that you just transferred that card to you. And so now I know that I can borrow that card from you, and I guarantee that it's legit, right?
Yeah.
There's a title and I can see the custody, and all the platforms, OpenSea and all these other platforms, are built around being able to inspect all that data and present that to us in a really usable way. And so that gives us that legitimacy that we can feel comfortable about. So if we scale back Web3 a little bit, maybe we can talk a bit more about consequence, because who cares about all this, right? Like,
right.
Digital collectibles doesn't sound very compelling. If we think about the size of the entire movie industry, movie market, and revenue in the last year, and we put that giant bucket, movies are big, right? Giant bucket over here. We take the entire revenue from the entire music industry. We put that bucket here. And we take NFL, NBA, NHL, and all the other ones. And then we take music again and stick it on top. The gaming market is still bigger. Gaming market is absolutely massive, right? digital entertainment is huge. And what we assume and what we presume, because we have a lot of biases, about video games is, to me, very remarkable compared to reality. It's a massive market. It's bigger than many of the markets we would assume are huge, are bigger. If we think, who's the prototypical example of a gamer? And you think about what that image is in your head. Yeah. Marketing and and television shows and movies and all that, probably presenting us some teenage boy, often, right? Turns out the market for video games, so the demographic for video games of women over the age of 18 is much larger than boys under 18.
Oh, wow.
The average video gamer, I think, is a woman in her mid-30s.
Wow.
And the biggest component of video games right now, or a very large component of that, is mobile. Most people think, I'm not a gamer, much like they think I'm not an entrepreneur, or I'm not a creative person, or I'm not a whatever. We self-select out. But then they're playing games on the phone all the time, right? And so the gaming market is massive, and people are spending bonkers amounts of money on digital collectibles. We don't call them NFTs because they're not specifically NFTs, because they're not leveraging some of that technology. It's not Web3 because we're not quite there yet. But our kids are paying for Robux, and they're buying virtual skins so they can go bounce around and do parkour in a video game online, right? They're buying skins for their character in Fortnite. Diablo just launched, and they're selling custom horses that you can ride for like $12. Right?
I went to the wrong school, I'm telling you. Why did I go to law school? This is what I think about in my head every single time.
So you can be really smart to take advantage of all the other industries you're learning about.
Yeah.
So let's take it back to Web3, right? It turns out we already collect stuff digitally. Our kids are doing it. They don't even understand it's special or different. They don't consider it digital. We don't think about those things, right? So Web3 is super emergent. It's brand new technology. NFTs are brand new. We have these weird acronyms that don't make sense to anybody except for the geeks that are really into the really early stuff, right? But it turns out all it is transferring billions and billions and billions of dollars in activity that's already happening, and it's starting to trickle into you leveraging technology that will be spread across a much broader new base. So by what that I mean is, right now, the platform that manages your digital horse on Diablo, right, and the platform that manages the ownership you have in the skin in Fortnite, and you can go on and on and on for all these digital collectible things that we own. They're all disparate. They're all over the place. None of it's connected. None of it's using the same even schema or standards to describe what it is, right? We have no access to interchange. You have no way of saying, I don't need this game anymore. I don't need all these collectibles, but somebody might find value and maybe I could resell it, right? That's normal for a lot of other stuff, right? Flea markets and Etsy and all these other things, right? And we can't do that in this digital world because the technology has too many barriers. There's too much friction, and there's not really incentive for these industries to allow that to happen. That's all going to change. Once we have a public shared database and a bit of standards for how we describe this digital stuff, right, then it removes that friction, as long as these industries are wanting to do it. And they're testing that water, and they're getting a lot of backlash. But it's going to happen. And when it happens, we won't call it Web3 anymore, just like we don't say www. Right. And we won't call it NFTs, just like it'll be seamless behind the scenes on our phone. Right. We won't even notice. How many people that are watching this video, how many of you know what a POP3 server is, or SMTP? How many of us have to bother knowing what our TCP/IP settings are to connect to the internet? We don't do that anymore. It's seamless. The best technologies, right, are the ones that we don't have to worry about and we don't notice. They're just happening in the background. So this is super emergent stuff, but eventually we'll find where it makes sense. We'll find how it's helping solve problems, and it'll just be embedded into things. Right. Yeah. It'll be over.
And one of the things that I think we probably should just touch upon real quick is, so, when I need to get, or anybody else needs to get on the internet, we're just so accustomed to Google, right? We're just launching Google, and then we're doing our searches. So if somebody's like, I want to go experience Web3, like, how are they getting into, Web3?
That's a really good question. So most of Web3 right now that would be of interest, I think, to the public would be these digital collectibles, right? And so there are different examples. There's some fashion brands that are experimenting that. I own this virtual thing from Gucci, for example, right? And I know like there's a lot of interest in fashion, actually, in this. There's some video games and areas like that. I'll highlight a couple different collections. And one of the aspects of Web3 are what they call PFPs. And they're basically just digital artworks that people might buy and sell and collect. And some of those have utility behind them. In other words, if you buy a VFriends from Gary Vee, you get access to his 10,000 person conference every year. That's a huge deal. And like major A-list stars are speaking on stage or performing and things like that. You can't get in unless you have the NFT, right? So the NFT has this extra utility. He's also got a restaurant that you need the NFT for membership, right? And so instead of, let's say I have an exclusive membership to a club, and I don't need it anymore because I have kids and I just can't do these things anymore, right? Which is absolutely true. Can I sell that? And how hard is that to sell? Well, it turns out it's really easy if it's on a digital platform. And so these platforms, one of the biggest out there is called OpenSea. And OpenSea, you can do a search across any number of different ways to find unique artists that you like to support, like Amber Vittoria, for example. And she's got this amazing artwork, and some of it's actually fairly affordable, right? And they have all these different collections, and so I've been collecting some of that. And so there's Johnny Depp, right, has his art in NFT. There's several known entities that have been creating this stuff, as well as brand new artists and folks here in New Hampshire that have been making their own collections. Some really cool people up in Manchester. And so you can go and buy these collections and then hold them, right? And maybe you're speculating over time. Like you might own a Monet or a Picasso or something like that. Others might have utility and they might be game related. And so you're participating in that sort of that world.
Yeah, so you're actually essentially having to go into a separate platform. Which that platform you can access right on your computer, right? So it's not like you're buying a special computer that is a Web3 computer. It's your there's another one where I think a lot of people are buying digital lands. They're buying property. I don't know why I can't think of the name of that.
There's
platform.
a few. There's Sandbox. There's Decentraland.
Yes, Decentraland. Yeah.
So that's a really good point. The Metaverse, right, is also an area where people have really meshed that strongly with Web3.
Yeah. And
so as an aspect of that, I own digital land. How crazy is that? It's kind of ridiculous. I own it in Decentraland. So there's virtual land, and I own a plot, and you can put stuff on that plot. You could lease it to someone else. You could create a casino in there, and there's people do all kinds of crazy stuff.
Right. And it's expensive, right? And actually, you know what? Let's go back a little bit because we brought in a new term, Metaverse. So let's.
Oh dear.
Let's kind of, because I kind of commingled them when I really shouldn't, because it's really two different worlds here. So let's break down what the Metaverse is and how it essentially connects to Web3.
Okay, so Metaverse, to me, is just really like. It's a multiplayer video game. That's the way a lot of us think about it. So people have played World of Warcraft or EverQuest or a number of different multiplayer, immersive, massive multiplayer games in a 3D environment. And so think of Metaverse as sort of evolving that to the next level, whatever that means. And I think we're still figuring out what that means, by the way.
I think so too.
So a lot of people have assumed that means VR. And so, Facebook changed the name of their company. They're Meta now, right? They're all 100% in on the Metaverse to the tune of billions and billions of dollars and a lot of drop in the stock price. Yeah. But they're launching, right? They're focused on a VR verse for us to live, entertain, work from, things like that. And so there are Web3 focused companies that are saying, we're doing this Metaverse, but you should own a stake of it. You should have a piece of this. It shouldn't just be one big corporate entity that holds everything, right? That allows you gated access. So Decentraland is a good example. Sandbox is another, where you can own virtual property and build your own space within the metaverse. And so Sandbox is an interesting. It looks like a cross of Roblox, for those that know what that is, as a gaming platform for kids primarily, and Minecraft, right? And they have lots of big stars. Snoop Dogg has a whole palace. I bought some of his music, actually. It goes on. Web3 and music is actually a whole big thing that's been growing. But going back to the metaverse, it's a hugely experimental time right now. I think if anybody told you exactly how it was going to go down, they're probably trying to sell a book, right, or their digital platform of some kind. Yeah. Because it doesn't matter what I think or you think. It matters what the market thinks and how that flows. And sometimes what seems obvious doesn't happen just because the technology isn't ready. And I think that we got way ahead of ourselves in sort of this Web3 sense, in that people were investing enormous amounts of money and putting all this stuff forward, but we didn't have the tech to back it up that was compelling enough for people to actually want to use. And so we're seeing a time where all of that receded, a lot of the markets shrunk, value of a lot of digital stuff shrunk.
It's going down.
But there's enormous amounts of building going on, right, to create the infrastructure and the platforms to support that next cycle. And I said that word cycle, I think maybe twice, maybe the first time, maybe I intended to say it earlier. But crypto as a whole tends to move in cycles. And so we were joking about this before. How many times has Bitcoin died, right? And so NFTs died, right? A lot of them went to zero or dropped in value. But there's a cycle to it. And we'll see the strong ideas with potential and real utility thrive again, and new innovative ideas come and new integrations, and then we'll see this upswing again. And it tends to be in crypto these cycles, and we're seeing that same case play out for Ethereum and Bitcoin, for using multiple different kind of trading platforms to trade your digital goods or currencies, and there's this ebb and flow, right? And then there's a lot of outside political pressures that, of course, come to bear to influence that. And so,
the regulatory stuff, which we'll talk about a little bit. So for me, when it comes to the metaverse, you're right, it's very gamey. The 3D, it looks like Minecraft that my kids love to play. So aesthetically, for me, it's like I'm still, my brain just can't register it. So I feel like I'm more into like the more realistic, like looking kind of platform. So yeah, I've played around with it and I'm like, I'm bored. But what I want to do now is jump into something that we're starting to hear, because even here in New Hampshire, you can you can stop paying your taxes, with certain towns using, the digital wallet. So what in the world is the digital wallet? We're hearing a lot of it lately where, internationally, this might be, the new currency. Should we stop using paper money? Like, where are we heading here? So we're going to start with, what is digital wallet?
Okay, we got 2 more hours for this, right? Yeah, okay. So, all right, let's take a step back and understand that our modern version of money and how we understand money is not something that has existed for thousands of years. It hasn't even existed for 100 years, right? Modern money as a construct is, in the timeline of things, a relatively new thing. And it's still evolving, right? And so, the way we had checks and we could kind of guarantee checks for a while, and then we kind of move over to credit cards and different kinds of credit cards, and then all of a sudden everybody's just using credit cards, and cash is not really so much of a thing for many people anymore. I still like cash because I don't like people tracking me, right? Nobody needs to know how often I buy grapes. It's none of their business. However, that is a pathway that we're going, even though it adds fees and a little bit of friction, because it gives so many people so many other benefits, right? And those benefits are often just in flexibility, in ease of use, and not worrying about going to the ATM, or just putting off thinking about how much it really cost me, which is a lot of it, like that psychology part of it. So thinking about that sort of money system, there's kind of an obvious feeling transition that's going on, right? From physical trading of stones or rocks or beads or whatever to paper representations or coins to simply tapping our card, right? And having it magically account for it somewhere. Now, when I tap my card to pay, that's probably going through many different companies. They're all taking little bits and cuts, right? And then the merchant has to transact and batch balance at the end of the day, and there's lots and lots of back-end friction and fees and all kinds of stuff that are going on. So it's not a one-to-one, not the same way as me giving my local favorite barista $20, right? It's cash in there, they put it in the bank, it's pretty simple. When we use credit cards, it's just not that way. It's also a lot more friction for me to do something like donate $50,000 to a family in need in Ukraine, right? There's a large sum of money, it raises a bunch of red flags. How do you get it to them? How are they transferring it? The fees that are involved for so many immigrants here in America sending money back to their families, right, to support them. The fees involved and all that, very, very high. So fast forward to now, we hear, right, cryptocurrency is crazy, it's not stable, it's unsafe, or it's going to crash. Simultaneous to all that, many nations, most nations now, are considering their own basically digital currency, their own digital dollar. So China, US is having conversations, a bunch of conversations happening in Europe that would function similar to what we would have. It would miss some of the benefits, clearly, of having a public blockchain, but it would function in somewhat similar ways for finance and banking and transferring information. It would also record a lot of information about our transactions. And so there's a lot of privacy concerns. We talked about privacy earlier. Think about China having access to every single transaction for every dollar that's spent in their, currency that's spent in their country. Once you have that kind of information, it's not unusual for vendors to know more about you than you do based on your changing behaviors. It was, 14 years ago? I'm making that number up. It was a long time ago that there was a case of someone getting direct marketing for pregnancy, even though they didn't know they were pregnant yet. And it's because our vendors, because everybody is sort of tracking us. It's their job to be able to target us with ads, right? To target us with material that we want, because we're much more likely to buy that than just random stuff that they're trying to send us. So they're trying to figure these things out. And so if you're buying pattern changes because you're on chemotherapy or all these privacy sensitive informations, it's all out there. You just have to watch what you're buying, right? I know how healthy everybody in my house is because I watch what happens, but so does everybody else because they're watching me and what I buy and the facial recognition that happens in Walmart, right? All this privacy stuff is already out there. It's already kind of alarming. And so having this digital currency that is controlled and tracked directly from the government is raising a lot of legitimate concerns.
Yeah. So, when you start talking about the digital currency, a lot of people who are like, well, I've got all my savings, in the bank. So what's going to happen to my money in the bank, right? And how does it, how's my money magically become digital, right? So
here's an interesting thought. I have money in the bank. You don't have any money in the bank. They don't have a special little bin, right, with Josh's $12 in it, right? So, the banks, when we give a bunch of money to a bank to hold for us in a savings or an investment account, that's a liability for the bank. The bank actually has to return it to us, plus a little bit of interest or, services, whatever. So they have to do something with that money to make more money to pay for the tellers and everybody else, right? So just holding the cash for us is a liability. That's why Silicon Valley Bank collapse was such a big deal. They had so much money being invested, deposited with them from all these startups that they had to go and invest it. And they did it in the safest place possible, which is like these bonds and treasuries because nobody thought rates would change. And they did a long-term version of it. The rates changed, which meant the value of their investment got cut in like half, right? And so as soon as I wanted to pull my money out, they don't have it there to give me. They have to pull it out of their investments. This is a very simplified version of all this, by the way. They have to pull it out of these investments. Now they're making losses by doing that to give me back the money. There's a bank run. Everybody's pulling out millions and millions of dollars. Everything collapses, right? Because there's a huge entity and a lot of people involved in order just to hold money, right? Yeah. Think of all the infrastructure, all the employees, all the investment vehicles, all that stuff that has to exist in order just to hold my money. So, digital wallets, we talked a little bit about that. All that is, I'm trying to think of this in the simplest way. The software we install that might be a wallet, maybe it's MetaMask or something like that, is simply a tool to get access to help you authenticate to the blockchain itself. You're not actually holding any currency on your local phone or computer or anything like that. There's no digital version of a thing that gets transferred like an image or a data file or anything like that. What it's doing, your wallet, all it's doing is authenticating you. It's saying, yep, this is Flo. She knows her secret password and her 12-word phrase, and so she can transact under this wallet address. And because the blockchain is global, because it has all the information from every transaction, it knows exactly to the tiniest fraction of, let's say, Bitcoin that you own. And so when you're sending Bitcoin to someone else, all you're doing is saying, allocate 0.02 Bitcoin from my wallet to this new wallet over here. It's not actually physically sending anything.
Right.
There's no file that goes anywhere. It didn't actually exist on your computer. It's just all literally ones and zeros in space.
But where is that money getting onto the wallet? Right. Well, how am I transferring that money, and how the money in my bank, how does it become that digital money?
Okay, so the absolutely easiest pathway for everybody in the States is going to be to use a company called Coinbase. There's lots of different companies. I'm just going to give one out because we don't have time to kind of get into all of it.
Right.
So Coinbase is a insured, U.S. registered company that is theoretically doing their best to follow all the regulations. There's lawsuits with the SEC related to that because they can't figure out what really regulations are. There's a lot of political mess right now, right? Because there's high stakes. And so, but even still, they're a publicly traded company. That's like the legit company to buy from. There's other entities out there. You can literally buy from local groups or something like that if you wanted to. But just to make it easy for everybody and not have to get into the whole business and everything. Keep it simple. I do not own any stock. I don't have any vested interest in Coinbase. But that's just the easiest here in the States,
And we're not promoting Coinbase either, and you don't have to go. Just this is for educational purposes only.
Yes, absolutely. I should note, there are ATMs. These have existed, and I think New Hampshire was one of the leaders in getting Bitcoin ATMs. And there are ATMs that you can actually go to, and you could look up websites that would kind of give you addresses all. So you could put in cash there, or swipe a credit card.
And then it converts.
And it converts. But then you have to know more about your wallet, or you have a paper wallet, and that's probably not super safe. And Coinbase can actually hold it for you. Now, we can talk about FTX a little bit.
Right.
Because there's a good transition to risk here.
Yeah. So, one of the things what made, national headlines was FTX. And, you can kind of explain briefly. And they were essentially, these guys were like the creme de la creme. They had celebrities and invest in Tom Brady, Steph Curry, right? The basketball player. I'm saying his name wrong. You can tell I'm not really a basketball fan like that. But yeah, it just became a huge scandal because the money went poof, disappeared, gone, millions. And the world stopped for a moment because now it became a regulatory issue, right? Because right now, cryptocurrency is currently not protected, right, by the FDIC.
No, not by the FDIC, no.
Right. So how do you recover money that is, quote unquote, not really insured, right?
Right. So that's a really good point. So really quickly about Coinbase and FDIC to make sure it's clear, because some people might get confused when they're looking things up. Coinbase does have FDIC insurance.
Okay.
That's for the cash that you're holding in Coinbase. So when you transfer it and convert it into a currency, that insurance no longer applies. I'm not a lawyer, best of my knowledge.
Right.
So here's what went down with FTX, and it's very complicated, and they're going to make all kinds of money on movies about this, right? But a huge brand new shining star of a startup that was helping you buy and trade cryptocurrency. They made their own currency, and they use that as a platform to be kind of like a neutral dollar, almost, if you think about it that way. And I think there was a lot of shenanigans. They also owned their own investment company. And that investment company was doing a lot of trading that was propping up the value of things. And so there's a lot of shenanigans in the background that made it look like they were holding and had a lot more money than they really did. And once again, with Silicon Valley Bank, once the card starts to fall at the bottom, it just starts collapsing, and there's no way to hold it, right? You can't hold a house of cards up anymore. And they were spending money left and right to try to get ahead of it, right? They donated lots of money to politicians. They got naming rights for places. They had Super Bowl ads, like all those sort of things to try to get ahead of it, because if you grow fast enough, it keeps up with it, right? That's that part of that Ponzi scheme. It wasn't specifically a Ponzi scheme. It wasn't specifically related to cryptocurrency. It was just hugely irresponsible business money management. And so when FTX collapsed, of course, that ripples through the entire industry.
Everybody was like, cryptocurrency's dead.
Right.
Don't invest. Stop what you're doing.
Exactly. When like it's always, right, hindsight, you're like, well, actually, I shouldn't invest when it's at the top. I should wait for some sort of crisis when it plummets to the bottom and then buy it. If we could only find when that bottom is and feel confident it comes back, that's a great time. Really hard to do. But that brings us back to the wallet and what happens to the stuff that I owned. And it turns out, if I buy money, or I buy one Bitcoin, it's like $30,000-ish right now on Coinbase, or we did it on FTX or anything else, I have access to those funds, right? As long as that company's alive and is not shut down, and as long as they have enough funds to return everything, everybody runs on it at once, much like that bank, like traditional bank scenario that we had the banking crisis of, right? And so what was happening with FTX and what happens with a lot of these online platforms, and it's very compelling, is they'll offer ridiculous amounts of interest if I just hold my stuff with them. And we saw a lot of people lose a lot of money because they were super greedy. Now, that's human nature. That's just how it works, right? I can make 80% if I convert it all to this particular cryptocurrency and hold it there for a year. That's insane. Of course I'm going to do that, right? But the math doesn't let that ride forever. And if there's a crisis, you aren't holding the wallet. It's not it's not in your wallet. It's not your digital access. You have given away your access to your cryptocurrency to this third party who's managing and doing all this stuff for you, right? Now that's great because they have a lot of security and they have all these features and it's a lot easier than you having to worry about it yourself, but there's a trade-off. And so with FTX, that was the trade-off. People got burned horribly badly by trusting that company and holding that there. Now, I think in the long run, people are going to be made whole or pretty close to whole. They're actually pulling back all kinds of money and they're finding ways to take value. And I wouldn't be surprised if FTX comes back from the grave and is actually a pretty legit startup again. Like they just purge all the wrong people, get strong people in there. They have a good platform. They'll figure it out. But it's horrible in the medium term for everybody that had money there, right? And this has happened several times. You know, we talk about hacks and cybersecurity and the blockchain. The major blockchains, they're all open source. Billions of dollars is transacted over hours, right, on these platforms, and they're open source. Everyone has access to all the code and the database. We have access to everything. Hackers aren't hacking that. What the hackers are doing is they're finding the weakest links, which is the third-party applications, right? The programs, the wallets, these third parties that are created to access all that stuff. And they're injecting themselves in the middle, or, which often the case, especially for Web3, but often the case for other areas, is they're tricking the user, they're tricking you and I into thinking that I'm interacting with a legitimate operator when in fact, instead of going to Coinbase it's Coinbase, but the I is actually a 1 or something like that, and it's a fraud. Or there's some other scam that's getting me to give my authentication or my login or access to my wallet to a bad actor. And that's usually where all these hacks are coming from.
Yeah, so user beware.
Yeah.
This is a lot. We don't mean to scare you, but it is emergent technology. There's still a lot of unknowns. So this is a great way for you to understand, the risks that are out there. And right now with regulation, even, the regulatory people are scratching their heads trying to even figure out. So in terms of the regulatory area, we're still seeing more like task force being put together for legislators to really figure out how to essentially, protect everyone. So real quick, because we're kind of already out of time, but this is so good, I just want to touch upon real quick before we end the show on the impact of artificial intelligence on this kind of these technologies that we're seeing. We already know that AI is getting big, and we might have to do a special episode that's just dedicated to artificial intelligence and talking about there's so much going on. It's like you said, we'll be here all day. So just real quick, what is the impact on AI on the blockchain and the Web3, and what are kind of people trying to figure out how to tap into the power of AI to make the blockchain more robust?
So the real quick answer is I don't know. Now, I have a lot of opinions, I have a lot of thoughts, but it's so emergent. I think that it's really hard to be able to narrow really firmly down and have a lot of confidence about it, because I think there's going to be some surprises out there, right? And I'm really interested in what crazy direction that takes us. But right now, most of our AI is largely driven on historical models. It's the data of the past, right? And that's really useful in a lot of ways. But how useful is that in the crypto, where we don't have a lot of data, or the data that we have may not really accurately represent what we can predict for the future, right? So there's absolutely people using AI for bots and trading and things like that. There's actually a lot of people using AI to generate images or graphics or content that they're then trying to sell, right?
Oh, okay.
And they're trying to sell it as a legit artist or pretend, lots of all of that stuff. I mean, if you go on YouTube, and this isn't Web3, but this gives you a flavor of it, go on YouTube and type in how to make money on AI, and there'll be a list of other things, Etsy, Amazon. I mean, in Amazon alone, you can, I just tested this. I just made my own book on Amazon, published it, and everything using KDP, and it was literally a journal with cat pictures on it. And I made all the cat pictures from AI. And it was a thought prompt journal. It was just an experiment for me to kind of like go through this exercise, right? So people are using AI in a lot of ways for content generation, and that's finding its way in various forms for the metaverse, for the graphics, for all that stuff, right? For 3D models or icon sets or building websites, lots of that. What I don't know the answer to, because I'm not smart enough to know this yet, is how is AI going to tap into the unfettered access of a robust global database and leverage that in real time? Like, what can the AI tell me? Can the AI alert me to risks, systemic risks, because it can see the transactions before I do? Can it automatically be doing, that trading, right? That's sort of the panacea of every trader, is like, I don't even have to do it anymore. I can just give you $100 and you're going to make me $1 million in 6 months by doing auto bot trading, right? Like, it doesn't happen, but that's, that would be great theoretically. But I don't know the answer to that, except for, I think we've talked a lot about Web3 and sort of this gaming perspective, right? So maybe if I can pivot a little bit on one thing to think about for Web3, and then how we might prompt AI for that. Anybody that's tried to sell a used car has gone through a ridiculous process, right? Anybody that's tried to buy a house, and that's this title, right? If you've lost your title to your car and you wanted to give your car to a relative or sell it or whatever, you have to go get that title back. And a title is just the government's authoritative way of saying you own a thing right? And it's cleared of debt, right? And if it's not, then the title has other kind of components added on. That's prime example of a way that we can leverage a blockchain, right? Why isn't that on a shared global database where everybody can see the title to this VIN number? And if I transfer then, because I have access to the digital identity that has access to that title, and I move it over Flow, and now Flow has clear title, and it happened like that. We don't need title insurance, right? And we don't need to hire all these companies. I didn't need to call my bank of 14 years ago to figure out them to go in their old archive records to show that I cleared my loan, right? So I could give my car to my brother. Like none of that stuff has to happen,
right?
Because right now all that data is obfuscated and hidden away. And so we can think about, again, titles for ownership of all kinds of things, where right now that's all digital information, right? Even though it's representing ownership of a physical good. So the nature of innovation in startups, I'm a startup guy, is the definition of like a startup versus any small business generally is it's got an innovative spin.
Right.
And so if you think of Uber, we all know what Uber is now. It's a taxi company, right? The innovation wasn't the car rides. The innovation was that I could click a button on demand and a car came to me, right? And it brought in drivers from all over to do that, and I could see it in this really compelling way. So there's a technical innovation that wouldn't have existed without a smartphone. Yeah. And so we have a crazy amount of brand new innovations happening at the same time that can break basic presupposition models that we have for how businesses work, right? Just like we broke the taxi industry essentially with Uber, right? It's gone.
Yeah.
So how does Web3 in a global database change the dynamics of ownership of things and sharing of data? How does unfettered trading of, I could move $2 million over to support Ukraine right now and probably pay $10, right, to do it. And it would happen in 15 minutes or less, right? That's massive change from the existing system. How does AI disrupt all these different industries? You could probably have a show where you've got a couple fun people sitting around a table, pick a random industry and company, and think about how the new technology can disrupt fundamental, basic, this is how it's done components to that business.
Yeah. There is so much going on, and we could talk about this all day, but I mean it. I think we're just going to have to create a special episode where we're going to focus on everything that's going on in AI. This has been great stuff. Hopefully we didn't confuse you, but it's a lot going on that you need to be aware of, all these technologies that are happening. And I appreciate you coming here and spending some time kind of just doing a brief overview. And we're going to have him back because we got to talk about AI, but we want to make sure we do it in a way where we have enough time. So thank you for coming on Get Tech Smart.
Thank you so much. I'm so thrilled to be on here.
Yeah, we'll see you soon because we're gonna schedule time for the other episode. And to everyone else at home, thank you so much for listening to us for a very fantastic, very highly informative episode of Get Tech Smart. And stay tuned for more episodes.